So you want to increase your damage in Diablo 4. Tip number 1, put blue gems into your weapon. That's because critical strike damage to crowd-controlled enemies works off of a lot of things. If you actually look at crowd control and what crowd control actually is, it includes stun, knockback, taunt, fear, tether, the ones you would think, but that also includes slow. This is a little confusing because damage versus slowed enemies is also a stat. So there are some aspects that will actually add slow onto your build. For instance, I'm using a Earth Werebear build. So when I'm using Earth skills, I slow them, which means naturally I now get critical strike bonus from my weapons. So blue gems on weapons are highly important. Tip number 2, try to get item bonus ranks and whatever your spam is, whatever your core skill is that's really for your build. For instance, Pulverize, I have 12 out of 5. That's because my item contribution here is +4 on my gloves. Gloves can actually roll bonus stats towards your actual level of your ability, and core abilities tend to be the ones you're spamming quite often, so try to get plus ranks on the gloves for that. The amulet will also give bonus ranks to some things, but it's mostly for passives. This can actually be quite good, as some of these passives are quite good, and you can actually synergize. For instance, I have bonus damage to slow, so if I got Crushing Earth passive on an amulet, you can see the obvious synergy with things like the boots I've already mentioned, and the critical strike damage from the blue gems. Tip number 3 is farm your Hell Tides. The reason you need to farm the Hell Tides is it will give you Forgotten Souls. Forgotten Souls are crucially important because that will allow you to upgrade your equipment all the way. The reason upgrades is important is because it increases your secondary stats. For instance, it's going to increase my overpower, it's going to increase my attack speed, my dexterity, my ranks of Pulverize if I upgrade these gloves, which they're already upgraded. Let me give you an example by upgrading a piece of equipment so you can actually see this in action. So if I take a weapon, let's say like this one, you can see the stats get massively upgraded. However, there's one thing you need to keep in mind, and that is breaking points. For instance, at 625 and 725, item power breaking points. What a breaking point does is doesn't change what secondary stats you have, but rerolls your high and low values. For instance, I'm at 12%, which is on the lower end. Now, if I upgrade this, I'm going to increase my stats. So I'll upgrade it one time. Now, if I upgrade it again, it's going to break it past 725. And you can see I gained 13% all of a sudden on this one, because what it wants to do is reroll that, and it actually is going to reroll this to a higher row for the damage to slowed enemies. So keep in mind, you might have a piece that has the correct secondaries, but a low row on all of them. Check and see if it's near that breaking point, 625, 725. I forget the lower ones. I'll put them in the pinned comment. As you reach those breaking points, it will re-roll these. So don't throw away trash pieces of gear unless they're all the way above 725 item power, because it will be unable to be re-rolled. But as you can see, I hit that, and now the row is on the higher end at 26.4 out of 28.2. Tip number 4 is you can actually increase your damage by focusing on something else other than damage. And by that, I mean generation. For instance, one of my spirit boards I've put a lot of resources into has to do with maximum spirit on kill. That's because spirit generation is completely important. If I have really high one-punch damage, but I'm not generating enough spirit to be able to spam, I'm just going to have really low DPS. Tip number 5 is going to be enchanting for me. I have massively increased my damage by doing enchants. The reason I recommend to do Hell Tides is, once again, enchanting needs Forgotten Souls. So if you do not go to the Hell Tide to collect these, you will be missing out on absolute tons of damage. Re-rolling these effects is what got me from like 6k attack power to 8500 attack power. I literally gained that just by re-rolling basically one stat here on my weapon and gained 186 willpower, which massively increased my skill damage and overpower damage for my build. So I highly recommend, once you get a what you consider like a god tier piece of gear, re-roll it, see if it's going to be really, really good. Do keep in mind this gets even more expensive. I'll re-roll this just for the sake of it. You can see it goes 47 intelligence, but it was 500k. I'll say no. The next one is now 577k. So it gets more expensive as you go. For that reason, try not to be too greedy when you're enchanting. Number 6 is put your best aspect, whatever one is the primary aspect for your build. For me, it's Pulverize, on your two-handed weapon. The reason for this is, with aspects, two-handed weapons double the damage of your aspect. It increases the power of it. So for instance, if it was a Grizzly Rage that increases the duration by 5 seconds, whatever this blue number is going to be doubled. It would be a 10-second increase. For me, it's Pulverize Shockwave. So instead of a 100% row, I have a 200% shockwave damage row, which is literally double the damage of the ability that is my major move. Tip number 7 is getting your glyphs to level 15 by doing nightmare dungeons. The reason for this is it increases your overall radius on the board. So this, all of these ones, any of these ones here, these are now within the radius, which means that the bonus intelligence that I'm getting, like this one, for instance, is now increasing my overpower damage. Look, this one node is increasing my overpower by 31.6% damage, and I would not have that if I did not level this glyph. Number 8 is going to be get vulnerability in your build somehow. For instance, I'm using Hurricane for my vulnerability, but there's other ways to do this, etc., through glyphs. However your class is, get vulnerability within your build. It is a really big increase in damage. And on top of it, if you actually look at the damage versus, there is a damage versus vulnerable stat as well. Extra damage granted against vulnerable. There it is, okay? So because of that, you can get rows, which is like damage versus vulnerable enemies. So if you have vulnerability within your build, it makes it easier for a weapon to be good for you. Number 9 for me is easily cooldown reduction. I've seen this slept on time and time again. For me, my whole build is around Grizzly Rage duration. So if I have Grizzly Rage up, I'm infinitely ramping. I can't have Grizzly Rage up all the time. So in order to have that, what I have to do is cooldown reduction. This rode 12.3%, so 12% off of my cooldown on 43-second cooldown is money. Because if you consider it, look at this aspect. This one literally gives me a 5-second increase on Grizzly Rage at a maximum row, which is a big deal for me. That's effectively the same duration increase I'm getting just from this one secondary stat on an amulet. Number 10 is going to be pot consumables. If you end up doing a nightmare dungeon, you can actually see what kind of enemies there are, etc., and you can match the potion to that. So for instance, fire resistance, etc., but some of these will actually increase your damage. Some will make you unstoppable and what have you. So look at this, overpower damage by 20%, considering I'm an overpower build. This would be one way to temporarily increase my damage. Of course, the 11th tip is going to be joining me on twitch.tv/DarthMicrotransaction, which will be in the description, the pinned comment, to learn more tips daily and to watch me live. Love you all. See you on the next video.